The first thing I noticed wasn't the tree, it was the smell. 3 years of rain coming through a hole in the roof does something to a house. Wet plaster, black mold, the sour reek of a place that's been drowning slow. You breathe it, and your body tells you to leave. Every animal instinct you've got says get out. In what used to be the dining room and looked up through the ceiling at the sky. There was a maple, a big one, 40 feet of it laid right across the ridge of the roof like it had decided to lie down and die there. Been there 3 winters. Snow on it, then melt, then snow again, each cycle working the damage a little deeper. The neighbor told me the owners cleared out the week after the storm, grabbed what they could reach, and never came back. Insurance called it a total loss, cut a check, and closed the file. Everyone said tear it down. The building inspector, the excavator I called, even the fella who sold me my last load of lumber, tear it down. I bought her for $41,000. I'm going to bring her back for around $95K over about 19 weeks. And I'll tell you right now, most of you watching would have bulldozed her by lunch on day 1. I don't blame you. She looked like firewood. But she wasn't. She's an 1889 farmhouse. Gable front, clapboard siding, the kind of place a dairy family built when they figured they'd be dairy people forever. I found the year burned into a floor joist down in the cellar and the name of the county mill stamped on the framing lumber. Same mill closed in 1940-something. That stamp is the only thing left to say it ever ran. This was somebody's whole life. Barn out back, long gone now, just a stone foundation left in the weeds. Family farmed this hillside for 4 generations. You can read it in the land if you walk it. Old fence lines grown into the tree line, a spring house half collapsed by the brook, apple trees planted in a row that nobody's pruned in 50 years. Then the milk price dropped, the young ones moved to the cities, and the last owners bought her as a weekend place in the 90s. They loved her, near as I can tell. Somebody reglazed all the windows by hand at some point, and you don't do that work unless you care. But the night that maple came down in a March windstorm, it went through the roof, through the attic, and stopped 1 floor short of the parlor. And after that, she was just too much for them. I understand that. Fixing storm damage is one thing. Fixing 3 years of neglect on top of storm damage is another animal entirely. Once the water's been in that long, the job doubles on you, then doubles again. First job was getting that tree off her, and that's not a chainsaw and a buddy job, that's a crane. You cut a 40-foot tree wrong on a compromised roof and you send the whole thing through to the cellar. Cost me $20,000 to $800 just to lift it clean so we wouldn't drop it through the 2nd floor. We rigged it in 2 sections, cut the crown off first, then lifted the trunk straight up and out. When they set it down in the yard, I counted the rings. That maple was 110 years old, younger than the house. Think about that. The house outlived the tree that tried to kill it. Now, once the tree was off, we could see the real damage, and here's where it got interesting. Everybody assumed the whole roof structure was destroyed. That's the natural read. Big tree, big hole, 3 years of weather. But when I got up in that attic with a light and a pry bar, I found something. And I'll tell you, I go up into a wrecked attic expecting the worst because that way you're only ever pleasantly surprised. The tree had punched through the roof sheathing and cracked 2 rafters. 2. That's it. The main structure, the ridge beam, and the plate, those held. Whoever framed this roof in 1889 overbuilt it. The rafters are true 2x6s, actual full dimension, not the skinny 1.5-inch stuff you buy today that measures short right off the shelf. And they're spaced tight, 16 on center when they could have gone 24 and saved themselves lumber. Somebody built this right the first time. My job is to not be the guy who ruins it. The rot, though, the rot was real. 3 years of water finds every path down, and it never runs where you'd guess. The attic floor was spongy in a 10-foot circle under the hole. I put my boot through a board just testing it. The plaster ceiling below it had let go completely, came down in wet sheets that must have weighed 60 pounds each. And the water had run down inside one wall cavity and rotted the top of a stud bay clear to the 2nd floor window header. That's the sneaky part of water damage. The holes in the roof, but the rot shows up 2 rooms away wherever gravity and a stud channel decide to carry it. I pulled the ruined plaster and lath out by hand, 40 contractor bags of it. Slow, filthy work and no way to rush it. And behind the lath, I found the old newspaper they'd stuffed in for insulation, 1911 date on it, a story about a barn raising 2 towns over, and an ad for a team of horses, $60 the pair. I set that aside. You don't throw those away. That's a letter from the men who came before, and I read every one I find. The mold cost me. I brought in a remediation crew for the worst of it, because I'm not messing around with black mold in a place I'm going to sleep in. They tented off the wet rooms, ran negative air machines, and hauled out everything that couldn't be saved. That was $4,600. Money I'd rather not spend, but there's no shortcut through mold that doesn't come back to bite you. The 2 cracked rafters. I sistered new lumber alongside the old, bolted through with half-inch carriage bolts, so the original stays in place doing its share of the work. You don't rip out good wood just because it's got a crack. You give it a partner. New sheathing over the hole, felt, ice and water shield along the eaves, and a proper standing seam roof went on before the next weather rolled in. Total on the roof, tree removal to shingles ran me about $19,000. But she was dry now. First time in 3 years that house was dry. And you'd be surprised how much a house perks up once you stop the water. The smell starts to lift within a week. The framing lightens back up as it dries. She started to feel like a house again instead of a wound. With the roof closed in, I turned to her bones. And this is where an old house either rewards you or breaks your heart. I got down in the cellar with a level and a flashlight. Stone foundation, dry-laid granite, the way they did it, no mortar. Just big stones fit tight by a man with a good eye and a strong back. And it had shifted. The southeast corner had settled maybe 2.5 inches over 130 years. Some of that from the tree's impact, most of it just time and frost heave working the stones a hair every winter. Now, 2.5 inches doesn't sound like much, but it means every floor upstairs runs downhill toward that corner. You set a marble down and it takes off across the room. I had to decide, do I chase it perfectly level or do I stabilize it where it is? I stabilized it. Here's why. This house has lived crooked for a century. The plaster, the door frames, the trim, everything's adjusted to that lean. Doors that were rehung to close on the slope. Casings that were scribed to fit it. Focus. If I jacked her dead level, I'd crack every wall in the place trying to fix a problem you can't even feel when you walk through. So I dug down below the frost line 4 feet, poured 2 new concrete footings under that corner, and set adjustable steel posts to catch the load and stop any more movement. Hold her steady. Don't fight her. There's a difference between fixing a house and arguing with it, and the house always wins the argument. The main carrying beam down there, though, that's the story. It's a hand-hewn timber, single piece near 30 feet long. You can still see the adze marks where some man shaped it by hand, each stroke a little scallop in the wood. And the end that sat in the wet corner had started to go punky, soft, maybe 6 inches in. I could sink a screwdriver into it to the handle. I'll admit something, my first plan was to cut that whole beam out and replace it with a laminated one. And I started to. Got the temporary supports in, jacked the load off it, made my first cut, and then I stopped because the rot was only in the last 2 feet. The other 28 were hard as iron, still ringing when I tapped them. Cutting out a hand-hewn beam to replace a bad end is like burning a barn to kill a rat. That first cut, that one's on me. I got ahead of myself, so I did it the slow way instead. Cut off just the punky end square. Scarfed in a new section of white oak with a long angled joint so the 2 pieces overlap and share the load, and bolted the joint with a steel fish plate on each side. That beam will outlive me now, and most of it is still the original wood that man shaped with his adze. Cost me a day of extra work and about $300 in oak. Worth every minute. Sistered up a few floor joists that had checked, dropped a new mid-span girder to take out the worst of the bounce on the first floor, shimmied the joists tight to it, and she was solid. You could dance on that floor now. Bones don't get much better than that at 130. Now, the guts, the parts, nobody sees and everybody needs. The wiring in this place was a museum. Knob and tube from probably the 20s, ceramic knobs and cloth wire strung through the joists, then a patch of rubber insulated stuff from the 50s gone brittle and cracking. Then some homeowner had added a few circuits in the 90s with no permit, and near, as I could tell, no plan, splices buried in walls where you'd never find them. 3 generations of electrical, none of it talking to each other. I ripped all of it out. Every foot, That's not something you keep for character. That's something you keep to burn the house down. New 200 amp service, new panel, all new circuits, home run, back to the box, done to code and inspected. Electrical came to about $11,000 with the service upgrade. That's not cheap. But it's the kind of money you spend once and never think about again, which is exactly the money worth spending. Plumbing, same deal. The old supply lines were galvanized steel, rusted near shut on the inside where you can't see it. When water can barely trickle through a 3/4 inch pipe, you replace the pipe. New PEX supply runs quiet and won't freeze burst like copper. New ABS drain lines pitched proper, a 1/4 inch to the foot so everything flows the way it should. New water heater, about 8,000 watt. And here's where Vermont started leaning on me. It was early November by the time I was in the walls, and if you know these hills, you know what's coming. First hard frost's already behind you, and the real cold's 3 weeks out. I had maybe 4 weeks before it got too cold to do the work I needed to do warm. Cellulose won't settle right when it's freezing, and my hands stopped cooperating below a certain point, so I chased the insulation hard. This house had almost nothing in the walls, that old newspaper and some horsehair. That was it. No wonder the last owners could only stand her on weekends. I dense packed cellulose in every wall cavity, blown in through holes I bored between the studs, packed tight enough that it won't slump and leave a cold gap up top. Put a proper vapor setup and baffles in the attic so she can breathe without rotting, and spray foam the rim joist down in the cellar, which is where most of an old house's heat sneaks out, right along the top of the foundation. Insulation ran about 6,000 tons. First real cold snap hit while I was finishing the attic. 10 degrees, wind coming off the ridge, the kind that finds every gap in a building. And I fired up the new heat and stood in that house, and it held warm. First time in 130 years that house was actually tight. I'll be straight with you, that felt better than any finished work I'd do later. A house that stays warm on its own is a house that'll be lived in. Which brings me to the pretty part. The part you came for, the floors, first. Under 3 layers of ruined carpet and vinyl and a black felt paper that had glued itself down, I found the original wide plank pine. Boards a foot wide, some of them, cut from trees that grew on this very hill and hauled to that mill I mentioned. The water damage had blackened them in that one corner where the leak ran, and I had to replace about 40 square feet. But I salvaged old boards from a closet floor in the back of a pantry, spots nobody looks, to patch the visible rooms, and so the whole thing is period correct, same wood, same wear. Sanded them down by hand along the edges where the drum sander won't reach, and that honey color came up out of the gray like the house was waking up. Oil finish, no poly. You want to feel the wood underfoot, not a plastic coat between you and it. Kitchen I kept simple and honest. Shaker cabinets I built myself in the shop. Frame and panel doors painted a soft sage green. Soapstone counter, because soapstone was what a Vermont farmhouse would have had, quarried an hour from here, and it takes a hot pan without flinching. A farmhouse sink, deep enough to bathe a dog. I put the range where the old cookstove chimney used to run, so the venting had a natural path, straight up and out. Kitchen came to about $14,000, and half of that's the cabinets I built by hand over 2 weeks in the shop. Now, the piece I'd been protecting this whole time, when I first walked through back in the parlor, there was a staircase, and the newel post at the bottom, the big turn post you grab coming down, it was a beauty. Solid cherry, turned on a lathe by somebody who knew exactly what he was doing, every bead and cove clean. Fluted below with a carved acorn on top. 3 years of damp had raised the grain rough and dulled it gray, and there was a crack running down one side where the wood had swelled and shrunk with the seasons. I could have bought a new post for $100 off a shelf. But that acorn was carved by hand by a man who's been dead 100 years, and I wasn't about to throw his work in a dumpster and call it progress. So I took her out careful, marked the base so she'd go back the same way, brought her to the bench, and spent the better part of 2 evenings on her. Cleaned off a century of grime with mineral spirits and a soft brass brush, worked the glue deep into that crack and clamped her overnight, brought the raised grain back down with fine paper, and rubbed in oil till the cherry went deep red-brown, the way cherry does when you treat it right. That acorn came back sharp as the day he cut it. Set her back at the bottom of the stairs, and she's the first thing you see now, walking in the door. That's the heart of the house right there. Everything else you can buy, not that. So let me walk you through her. Finished, pull up out front, and she's a proper 1889 farmhouse again. Fresh white clapboard, black windows, that new standing seam roof. That'll outlast me by 50 years, and a stone step at the door I reset level. That maple's gone, milled into boards drying in my barn for the next job. She looked her age when I bought her, now she looks her prime. Step through the front door into the entry and there's that cherry newel post glowing right where a man set it in 1889. The floor under your feet is the original wide pine, warm and honey-colored. Left into the parlor and it's bright now, plaster smooth and painted a soft cream. That crooked charm still in the old door frames because I let her keep her lean. Back to the kitchen, sage cabinets and black soapstone, the deep sink under a window that looks up the old pasture where the cows used to be. Up the stairs, hand on that newel post again, to a bathroom that's all new bones but old feeling. A clawfoot tub I found for $200 at a salvage yard and reglazed myself. White as a fresh egg. And then back out front, standing in the yard where that tree used to lie, looking at a house that everyone told me was firewood. All in, she came to right around $95,000 in 19 weeks. A 110-year-old maple tried to end her, and 3 years of neglect nearly finished the job. But the man who built her in 1889 built her to take a beating. She's got good bones. She always did. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Somebody built this right the first time. Full dimension lumber, hand-hewn beam, 16 on center when they didn't have to. That house survived a tree because a man 130 years ago cared more than he had to. Did the work nobody would ever see, the way it ought to be done. My whole job is just to not be the fool who undoes that. Next one's already waiting for me. It's a little cape down in the valley, and this one didn't get hit by a tree. This one's been sitting in a floodplain, and the river's come through the first floor twice. Everyone tells me the sills are gone, and she's done, rotted right off her foundation. But I got down in that crawl space with a light, crawled on my belly through the mud, and I saw something under all that silt that made me buy her on the spot. I'll show you what it was next time.